All right. Let's take seats, and we're going to begin the summary session. Is this thing on? Let's take seats, and we're going to begin the summary session. Please find your way to the front of the room. Who is excited for the last summary session of the day? Everybody look. Madars is excited. There we are. I mean, I'm no Tarek, but let's be excited about this. All right, let's get the first presenter up. We're going to go in the same kind of order as we did yesterday, just reading down the schedule. So first, let's have a representative from the Communicating Without Official Structures group come up. Elizabeth, send someone to come up. I'm unofficially communicating to you to unofficially communicate to someone to come up and share your results. Well, Elizabeth is making her way. I guess I'd also like to say Shana Tova to all of the members of the tribe in the room. Happy New Year.
Are you willing to do it, Patrick? I have no voice. I have my own to do. Oh, usually it's another person. Okay.
You got it under control.
I have no voice.
You have a microphone.
Hi, guys. Okay, I'm going to try to find my voice here and losing it. So I ran this session on communication without official structures. At first, we went through the various channels through which people are now communicating within this community. So things like forums, Reddit, Twitter, mailing lists, blogs, IRC, and talked about them a little bit each. We then noted that there's also the IRL component. We're here right now together. So conferences and meeting together, how there are different forms of communication when you're like using text, for example, than when you're in person. And one of our concerns was that it's a lot easier to read into things negatively when it's just via text. And it may not be ill-intended at all, but people may assume negativity. So when you're in person, it's easier to see things like body language or other means of communication. So one of our goals was, are there ways in which we can encourage the community to assume good faith in its communication? We also discussed the issue of trolls and how there are certain forums where there is trolling within this community. We noted that certain communities can establish a baseline whereby the kind of general respect amongst the members is such that you don't necessarily have a lot of trolling. And we wanted to encourage that kind of thing within the community. We discussed bringing new entrants into this space and how, although it would be great if you could take the core devs and just clone them and then have them explain everything to every new member of the community, that's difficult. So we pointed to the concept of systematizing knowledge. I know there's another session that we'll hear from. And having better resources for new entrants to the community so that then when they enter and they join a mailing list and they have some idea, but somebody's already tried that, they're not just immediately shot down, but instead they can kind of be onboarded and brought in to the community in a way such that they don't need to necessarily be shot down or have negativity involved, but it can be productive. We noted that there can be means of mentorship or maybe certain ambassadors that may not be, say, involved in core development per se, but can explain to people that are just getting involved or starting out certain resources and certain forums such that they could kind of get up to speed. A lot of this, of course, depends upon having the right resources in order to do so. So I'm really excited to hear what the other session has to say about that. Lastly, we discussed a concept of not quite a code of conduct like we've had here, but maybe a general rallying cry, a code of ethics, or a statement that the community could collaborate on and put out, that people could get behind around collaboration, treating each other with respect, assuming good faith. We pointed to Wikipedia as the type of community that has had that. It, of course, would be opt-in within the community, but it could be a general ethos or rallying cry for people involved. And sometimes, when you're online and you're tired and you're frustrated, it's easy to forget this kind of thing. But if we can remind people of the human nature of those that they're communicating with, bring them together in person in forums like these, such that they meet in person, and then when their online interactions happen, they remember this is somebody that I've actually met before. And more generally, if we can get folks within the community to just assume good faith and believe that everyone is well-intended, if we all want to make Bitcoin better, we can get behind this. So several of us decided that we're going to work on this kind of statement or rallying cry or code of something. We don't know exactly what it is yet, and we may put it online, but the goal is to make it very positive, and to encourage people to collaborate and be respectful. Thanks.
Thank you, Elizabeth. You want to give us a quick rallying cry?
Sorry?
All right. So next up, let's have payment channels. So let's have, we got Lalu and Taj.
Okay, so we were talking about payment channels. I'll talk about some of the stuff.
Microphone.
I'll talk about some stuff. Flo talks about some stuff.
Yeah.
The initial things we were talking about were the soft forks. So some of the changes that need to be made before this is really usable, like the check lock time verify, which is pretty much all set. A relative check lock time verify would allow payment channels to be open for indefinite lengths, so you can sort of renew them without transactions to the blockchain. And then malleability fix, and that's kind of the trickiest one, because it's not so much tricky that anyone thinks there shouldn't be a malleability fix. It's just, it's a very interesting direction to go in, and you're like, oh, let's do this too. Let's put in this. Let's do all these fun things. And so then it can get fairly big pretty quick. The smallest fix would be something really simple, but while you're making a new SIG hash type, you might as well make a new signature type. And if you're making a new signature type, how about we have tree signatures? And how about, so there's a lot of rider bills that want to go on. And so you can have either just sort of a normalized TXID, no TXID, or don't sign your input at all, which allows for some really fun stuff, but maybe too fun. So that's sort of the worry. So that was the, yeah.
Yeah, and we also talked a little bit about thinking about the usability of payment channels to not just be on the layer 2, to also think about what the presentation layer looks like for the end user. We also felt that maybe we need to spend some more time focusing on the UX aspect, exactly how the flow will be from someone hitting a button on their phone. Are they even aware that they're using a payment channel? It's just an application that's proxying a payment channel. We also thought that having a list of open problems in this area, that maybe we figured out how to do relative time locks. What about routing? How do we handle routes and DOS attacks and everything like that? The other thing that we were talking about is outsourcing, that we can't expect users to always have a computer on at all times. We need to make sure that outsourcing is there, that it's easy to use, and that it's compatible, that maybe we can incentivize people to just to have outsourcing where they pay someone to stay online for them, or they have delegates. We have a group of friends who broadcast other people's transactions for them, or maybe should we even have capabilities where people can broadcast an old commitment transaction to educate users of the security parameters on the system itself. We talk about presentation. Are we going to still use Bitcoin addresses? Most likely it'll be just some alternative encoding. And maybe when you're requesting a channel through the network, maybe you also give them a backup pub key for the address. Maybe this pub key can also be your identity within the network. So if they can't route to you or something's not operational, you can still get that regular Bitcoin payment. So it's kind of a fallback.
Failure domain, routing is probably routing and connecting to the network initially are probably the biggest open questions at this point, in that You want a very well-connected graph with lots of people who don't trust each other. You don't want a situation where there's a very small. You don't want a situation where there's a small number of large nodes that have everyone connected to them, because then you lose all that decentralization. So you want it to sort of optimistically just connect to a lot of people and route things that way. And then also, what do you use for initial discovery? Initially, we could just use some kind of IRC channel where people get IP addresses, use some kind of DHT. Probably some of the work that's in BitTorrent is going to be really applicable to this. And then how do you present that to users? Is it going to be some kind of identifier at host? Is it going to be a hash-looking thing? So how to make it usable but also robust and not like centralized. And also Tor. You want it to be something that people can use on Tor, and that's like a pretty good requirement to have for these things.
Yeah, and like privacy needs to be, like a first-class citizen. We need to have like plausible deniability among routes. Tor maybe should be considered like the kind of like de facto transport, and maybe we can have these like locks around it, which Tor being a high latency network will still be compatible with those with like the time locks and such.
Fees is what did we talk about? Time stop. So that's another. We didn't go into it too much, but there are sort of systemic problems that any one channel is not such a big deal, but there could be problems when you have a lot of channels going down at once due to systemic risk. And so having a time stop where you have sort of a block height, a real block height, and then a sort of adjusted block height that the transactions could reference would be something to prevent that. And so a lot of these things we talked about were like crazy edge cases that will probably or almost definitely never be a problem, but you still have to have a solution for them, because if you have a solution for it, then it'll definitely never be a problem, because it's such a far out problem that and it's going to be fixed that no one will even try that attack. And also collaboration, sort of a bunch of people are implementing these things, all getting together, talking, making sure they're interoperable. It's not like a consensus issue like with Bitcoin, so that if there are 2 or 3 different implementations that don't work with each other, that's okay, but it's just sort of annoying / disappointing in that you don't need consensus, but it's nice to not have 2 or 3 different clients. And you're like, hold on, let me open my version 3 client so I can send it to my version 2 client so I can send it to you. Like, that would be annoying. Yeah. Is other stuff?
Yeah, and then we need to, take time and actually design these systems correctly, because we're designing them for the future. We need to be cautious and not make, some shortcuts or some undesirable trade-offs. We need to think about the qualities going forward that can allow, these systems to be robust and built upon for higher layers on top of Bitcoin.
Yeah. So we don't, it's not a, we need it today. It's better to take a little longer to get a good system, because still right now transactions are about 2 or 3 cents a transaction, so it's not like everyone's pounding on the door to get it right away. So we have a little bit of runway, a little bit of time to work on this.
And
Cool.
yeah, that's everything.
That was it.
All right,
Cool,
thank you
thanks.
for that enlightening information. All right, next up we'll have the interfacing with IETF, W3C, and ISPs.
Hey everybody. So we sat down as a group to try and take a look at what are some of the other organizations out there that we might want to be interfacing or interacting with, and we decided to hell with all of them. No. What we found is actually there can be a lot of value in us talking to some of the other groups out there that either we're dependent on in some ways or that have some experiences that we can use. And one of the first things that came up as we were talking about it is we see a lot of these organizations that have similar characteristics to us, but that also they tend to self-organize around issues in the same way that we did at the roundtables here today, to allow some more focused discussions to happen and allow people to work inside of their area of expertise. And one of the ways that we found that we think that we can work well with those kinds of organizations and get some real benefit to the Bitcoin ecosystem is if we can do a good job of defining some of the problems that we have and challenges that we're trying to deal with, like some of the network issues that we had talked about yesterday, and being able to more quickly get blocks distributed across the entire ecosystem, that these are things that other groups have already worked through some of the problems on. So like a quick example of that is the challenge that we have of trying to make sure that the block gets everywhere very quickly is very similar to the challenges that CDN networks have in ensuring that they can get content, whether it's live content or cache content, distributed to the corners of the globe as quickly as possible in a very high quality and high fidelity way. So one, we can learn from their experiences, but two, this gives us a really good way to go into these other ecosystems and do some spearfishing for really good developers. Because when we go in and we talk to them about Bitcoin, we don't always get the greatest reception. But if we can go into a group of networking people and say, hey, we have this really cool networking problem that's kind of like CDN and kind of like software-defined networking, except you can't trust anyone else in your network. Can you come help us solve that? You actually can get them like hooked on their own technology love rather than necessarily having to convince them that Bitcoin is awesome as the first step. And so as we look at ways to kind of attract people into our ecosystem, this can become a really valuable way to do it. And I think we've actually already pulled some developers from Linux and other places by doing exactly that. Also as we see things like the Web Consortium is going out and actually working on web payment standards, ensuring that we have representation at those kinds of meetings from some of the people that are working in online payments, so that as those folks are building those standards, of course we want them building them in a way that's positive to Bitcoin, but also we need to ensure we coordinate with these standards bodies so that they don't accidentally step on us by not understanding what our needs are appropriately. So, I mean, those are kind of the big takeaway points that we have. So, we think there's value in organizing around topics that help give us better digestible ways to do things, and then using those as leverage points to go and work with these other organizations to get some more help in our ecosystem. So, thanks.
All right, thank you very much. Perfect. We'll infiltrate them from the inside. Next up, we'll have perspectives and challenges on interfacing with China. While Jing's coming up, I'd like to take a minute to give a shout out to Jonathan in the back. It's not, you have to give me the information. Well, you can give a round of applause for Jonathan because it's not his birthday today.
So Skype told me it was his birthday, and so I ripped one of the posters off the wall and tried to get people to sign it. It's not his birthday. Skype lied. So basically, we didn't actually have that many questions in the round table, but if you want to do business in China, WeChat is really essential. I think that we've established that. Everyone in China uses WeChat. You can use it to pay each other. You use it to chat. It's like Facebook, Venmo, and Uber all combined into one app. So if you want to do business in China, download WeChat. Some of the questions that people asked were regarding what the Chinese government feels about people mining Bitcoin in China. And apparently they don't care that much. The Chinese miners say that in regards to mining, as long as it gives the government some benefit to have Bitcoin, they'll do it. So they have a panel of advisors from research institutions, universities, advising them on what they should do with Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies in general. Miners in China also, some people asked what they thought about the whole block size debate, how scalability will affect them. And the miners are saying they don't really care. They don't really understand technical aspects of Bitcoin. They just want y'all to make a decision. The way he said it was, Chinese people just want to go with the flow. Just tell us what your decision is. And he asked, so at the end of this conference, it's nearing the end, what's the decision? Have they decided? I was like, wait for Hong Kong. Latency is a really important parameter for Chinese miners in regards to the protocol. It's counterbalanced with the hash rate percentage for global mining and addressing Chinese miner concern. Besides these few points, we didn't really talk about anything else, but if you have any questions, the Chinese miners are really open to talking more over WeChat.
All right, thank you, Jing. So if you didn't take away anything else, get WeChat, get a new phone or something for it if you're concerned. Next up, we'll have someone from Systematizing Knowledge come up to share their information. Hopefully, we've been making a lot of knowledge here today. Some of it may be zero knowledge, but yeah, that still counts. All right.
Systematizing knowledge. So we've had, I guess, a problem over the last several years since Bitcoin was created, where we have an enormous amount of ideas and original research being created, and this isn't very organized. We have websites like Bitcoin Talk, and we've got Reddit, and we've got IRC, we've got various development mailing lists. We have, I guess, a new mailing list on the Linux Foundation, and so on. And it's difficult to index all of this, I guess, is a problem that we have. And it's also difficult to bring new people into the Bitcoin community because it's difficult to point them to anything where they can navigate themselves and figure out what they need to do to get up to speed. So we talked a little bit about the different targets we might have for outreach or for documentation and stuff. So we've got several groups who sort of have very different requirements. We've got developers and users, and miners are of course people that we all interact with. And then we've also got like professionals who are from other industries who might have applications. We've got policymakers is an important one. And we've also got academics. So people working in university doing research on Bitcoin. And we would need to take a different approach in providing information for all these people. The next thing we talked about are problems with the current way that information is organized, especially on IRC. So a couple big things are, first of all, is that there are big bottlenecks in producing content. There's a lot of stuff happening, especially around like Bitcoin core development, where there's only like one or two people, or for a lot of ideas, there's basically one person who knows what's going on. And often it's the same person for a lot of ideas. So we wind up in a situation where when people want to learn about stuff, the answer is always, oh, just go ask person X, go ask person Y. Meanwhile, person X and Y are completely swamped and they don't have time. So this is a bottleneck that we're working on improving, or that we need to improve somehow. And the other thing is the organization, which I've been talking about. Things are just very spread out. So looking towards solutions to this, we talked a lot about, well, first of all, we talked about hiring writers is something we've talked about in several sessions. This just sort of came up independently as, how do we get more developers? How do we improve communication, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe we should try to hire writers, because there's a lot of writers out there. There's more writers out there than there are developers out there, at least available writers. And they're probably a bit cheaper. And then secondly, overall, what ideas can we copy from academia? So this is kind of an interesting idea, because if you ever go to academic conferences, academics hate the way that they organize. We hate the peer review process and the journal process, and there's a lot of bureaucracy. It's very slow, it's very formal, and it's very hard to work with, and it's frustrating. But there's actually some pretty good consequences of the academic peer review process. One of these is that if you want to find a new idea, there's basically one place where it is. You can do a journal search and you will locate it. And you'll also be able to locate any responses to that idea, or any refutations if something was wrong. There's also a culture in academia of formatting your proposals in a certain way. In particular, describing very carefully how your proposal is new, how it differs from other research, what other sort of related work there is out there, and then what ideas that you're building on. And there's a big cultural taboo about not forgetting to do this, or failing to cite, or taking credit for something you didn't do, or anything like that. So this is something that's sort of missing in Bitcoin to a large extent, especially with just things that are posted to Reddit or posted on blogs and stuff. And this contributes to the difficulty in organizing information. So we would like, I guess, a way to encourage a culture of producing new ideas and describing new ideas in a way that is amenable to finding them and finding related work and finding out how they fit into everything else that's going on. And that was pretty much it.
All right, thank you very much. I thought we were all able to just, read through all of IRC every day. So next up, we'll have non-currency applications come up. So if someone from that group could join on the stage. Non-currency applications. I thought this was a Bitcoin conference. Who invited these guys? Oh, maybe I did. Program chair, mumble mumble. You're very welcome here.
Hey, so we had a lot to talk about in our group, and there were definitely a lot of kind of contentious areas where people don't exactly agree or have a shared view on exactly what's going on now or what the future will be of non-currency applications. We tried to kind of pin a few things down. We talked about, first of all, what about Bitcoin applies itself well to having non-currency applications. That they mostly rely on the information technology properties of Bitcoin, the integrity it provides, and the availability it provides. We want to talk about kind of general areas that we're seeing applications today, and applications like notary service and timestamping, copyright, arbitration, identity management, loyalty points, and then any number of various asset management systems. We had a number of kind of big questions about what sort of applications do we want, and that's kind of very open and what are appropriate. We looked some at what kind of security implications having various applications have on Bitcoin as a whole, various issues that come up from having assets that have value that's distinct from the number of Bitcoins that are in an output, and what that means to security, and then also various problems that applications could cause Bitcoin in incentivizing attackers who maybe are more likely to want to attack kind of some specific application and as a byproduct hurt Bitcoin as a whole. So that's certainly another thing to think about. We tried to split up applications into a number of categories. So we talked about but we tried a bunch of different categories. So we went over this a few times. We're thinking about applications using trustless timestamping, distributed computation, state consensus. We weren't really able to agree on any kind of clear categories that could fit everything, which is why we ended up talking about a number of different methods. And just to wrap up, we also talked a little bit about kind of possibilities of various different applications having different levels of security required, and various options to provide kind of lower security but cheaper provisions for some applications versus higher security and more expensive for others. So I think that about covers it. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Harry. Just to provide some context, like their proposals came in like super late, and I was very, very excited because I was like, yes, they submitted 2 presentations that are going to be really kick-ass, so thank you guys for coming. All right, so we're kind of in between workshop sessions, so I'm going to do the kind of patronizing thing and tell everyone to get up, get a little stretch in, crack your back. You may not be aware, but there's actually a really wonderful piece of art in the room. So if you look over this way, there is a Novena laptop. I just spent some time actually in Shenzhen kind of seeing where that kind of stuff gets made with Bunny, who made the Novena. So that's really an awesome laptop, fully open source. Cool to see one of those around in the field. Open source hardware. Firmware. Everything. Has an integrated FPGA and other things for doing hardware development. Really awesome. Do you take that on the plane with you? Brave man. All right, so let's resume. So next up we'll have I don't think we will have this one. Next up we'll have actionable network events and planned responses. we can geek out over hardware later.
Okay, so we talked about 4 primary things, which was network partitions, the block size halving coming up, and then failures of centralized things, such as like what if Coinbase collapses or there's a major hack or something, and then sort of disaster notification, kind of like when the hard fork happened between 0.7 to version 0.7, and how do we get people notified so we can have people working on the problem as fast as possible. So the network partition issues, we were primarily discussing what happens if China puts up intensifies the Great Firewall of China and just shuts off all communication. You're going to have the China side of the network getting ahead, or maybe the hash power is going to be even. You're going to get really long forks, and so you're going to have a reveal where like one side's 16 blocks ahead, one side's 18 blocks ahead. And the people on the 16 blocks are like, we'd rather keep mining the 16 blocks on the chance that we'll become ahead. And so you could have these really prolonged forks just because they aren't going to skip, they aren't going to give up 16 blocks of rewards just because the other side is 2 blocks ahead. And so those were, and then the other thing is that if one side has much more hash power than the other side, the side without hash power, the transactions are just going to freeze. And you're not going to be able to get, confirmations are going to be meaningless, and you have to somehow get the transactions across the partition. So we talked about things like, worst case scenario, you can take mail, like physical mail, and mail block headers across the partition. But more likely, satellites might be useful, and so your latency goes way up. But at least blocks are getting across the partition, or like shortwave radio, or you could set up there are wireless like Wi-Fi routers that can do point to point over like 500 miles. So maybe you can set up a couple jumps and jump a network partition, or use SMS or some form of steganography. So that's sort of what we talked about with network partition. For the block size halving, I'm going to start with sort of a lesser problem, which is that the final 25 Bitcoin reward block is going to be more attractive to mine than the first 12.5 coin block. And so miners will never move forward. They're going to keep fighting and trying to steal that 25 coin block. And so if this gets really bad, the solution is pretty simple. You just have someone make time lock transactions that are, a few blocks in the future, and get, incentivize miners to move past that one block snipe. But also I think just in general that would resolve really quickly, and it requires specialized software to do this type of sniping. I don't think most miners are going to implement that. The more interesting problem is that the reward halves, but the difficulty does not. And so where electricity is the most expensive cost of mining, suddenly it's not profitable for anybody at all because the reward is halved. And so all the miners shut down at the same time, which would be a disaster. The chain completely grinds to a halt. And so how do you get around that? And so we were just kind of hoping miners stay on, or you beg them to take a loss for 2 weeks until the difficulty adjusts, or you do a Kickstarter to make transactions that have high fees. But then we realized that a lot of miners have fixed electricity costs, or even fines for not using their electricity. And so they pay, say 20 grand a month to get a megawatt, and then if they don't use that whole megawatt, they have to pay more than 20 grand a month. They pay a penalty for not consuming the electricity. And so these costs are sunk or fixed. And so we think that actually what's going to happen is the difficulty is going to half, and miners are just going to eat it for 2 weeks because their costs are already fixed. And so large farms don't actually benefit from shutting down their miners for such a short period. And so I think that this is also not going to be a huge issue. Centralization failure is what it tells us, is just if some centralized service has a disaster, Coinbase goes down, coins get stolen, something like that. And we didn't talk about it too much, but we think that primarily it's a PR problem, and there should be some sort of process for responding to these, and sort of being prepared for some service to bring a bad name to Bitcoin and having some sort of reaction. There's also talk, particularly for exchange failure, about preventative measures such as proof of reserve. And the general consensus was that proof of reserve isn't that valuable because, say, I could just buy a signature from someone, give them, $100, and then they'll give me a signature that says I own 1,000 Bitcoins or whatever. And so proof of reserve can sort of be faked using collaboration. So I think that the best alternative that we came up with is that you actually have to combine cryptography and like government regulation to sort of protect from centralized service failure. And then finally, we're talking about the notification system. What happens if just something out of the blue goes really wrong? How do we get developers together and notify everybody? And so there's no formalized like phone number tree or system for contacting everybody. And I think there's, especially from like a federal perspective, federal regulators would like to know that this system exists. And I don't think it would be that hard to just set up and like have a page that says, okay, if something goes wrong, we have people who can contact each other in a tree and we can get everybody on board, in a few hours. And having like an emergency mailing list, things like that. I will say there is a pretty good track record on previous disasters. I think with the recent fork, you had a bunch of important names like online and talking to each other within a few hours. So I think that it's just formalizing something so that everybody else feels better. But it seems like the system we have in place does a good job informally. So that concludes what we talked about. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, David. Next up, let's have challenges for major protocol changes and their benefits. We'll have Vlad for his second presentation of the day.
Hey, everyone. So we started off talking about hard forks versus soft forks, and then we quickly kind of saw that, there are major changes that could be soft forks and minor changes that could be hard forks. But we did also note that a hard fork makes a change more major because it requires lots of software upgrades and coordination that makes it quite difficult. And then we kind of talked a lot about different proposals and like what would be good about them, and mostly we spent a bunch of time talking about like the challenges behind getting proposals through. And then we started like listing changes to the protocol that could be regarded as relatively major changes, and then like particularly what would be blocking them, and then what would the rewards be. And if you want to see that, it's on the on the paper in the back. After this, you could go take a look. But I'll just like cover some of the common themes. So the benefits either usually made some feature set work, like Lightning Networks or sidechains or SPV or some blockchain pruning or something like that, or they increase performance of Bitcoin as it is, like make more transactions per second, make things process faster, or not be exploitable in certain ways. And then kind of pretty uniformly, the challenges had to do with the fact that like there isn't a consensus in the community and everyone involved as to whether the change should go through. And then that could be because, well, if there's a hard fork at all, then there's immediately going to be like some faction of people who decide, okay, no, this isn't good because it's a hard fork, and that's not. And hard forks are serious business, and we shouldn't be encouraging hard forks as a rule. And then there's technical disagreements, and there's disagreements based on like ideological grounds or grounds of like their people's like particular goals for what they want from Bitcoin. And then there's also incentive problems in the sense of people think that this change will benefit this party but not that one, or it'll disproportionately hurt certain businesses, or sometimes the incentives just aren't clear. It's not clear what the result of changes are to like the landscape. So basically all of that makes it hard for the community to agree as to whether a change should be proposed, even though there are usually benefits, although we can argue about them. And that's like the main thing that makes soft forks and hard forks, and in general, especially major changes to the protocol, difficult. So, can we find a way to agree? If so, then that should make things easier. If not, then that's going to continue to be a challenge. But the benefits look like, we're constantly thinking of improvements and changes that could be made, and like looking at how things could be better. So we just need to like agree on how to make it better. Good luck.
All right, thank you, Vlad. Next up, we will have how we can get 10 times the number of core contributors, education, and resources. Hopefully that will mean 10 times fewer problems. Not the other way around.
Unfortunately, as we know, that is not a linear scaling problem. So we actually draw a lot of parallels between the early time in the Linux development community and what's happened in the Bitcoin community. You have these large entrenched powers that are basically currently responsible. In the Linux world, it was actually Unix prior to Linux. In Bitcoin, it's the banking infrastructure, all the financial institutions, the large corporations that have control of data. So we drew a lot of parallels there. We talked about problems such as the industry, the parties that are interested in what Bitcoin and blockchain technologies provides. They're not really prioritizing contributions back to the core software. We found that there were only 2 industrial or commercial companies in the Bitcoin space that were actually responsible for hiring companies, with the third notable addition of MIT's effort, and previous to that, what the Bitcoin Foundation did. So the solutions that we proposed to that were actually asking that people, the industry professionals, including some of the newcomers to the industry outside of the Bitcoin industry perhaps, hire a dedicated developer that is solely responsible for contributing back to the Bitcoin core code. Not only developers, but hire technical writers to basically encapsulate these ideas and get them into simple, clean formats that are more easily understood by developers and other people alike in a wider range of skill sets. And furthermore, we talked about this other problem where there's not actually enough talent out there. So developers as a whole in the technology community are already in extremely high demand. With Bitcoin, it's doubly in high demand because the number of developers that are proficient developers and also know sufficient levels of cryptography, distributed systems, are even doubly more difficult. So we suggested these companies, industry companies, investing in the community by hiring interns, helping sponsor mentorships, and that's something that we can do as a community as well. So those of us who are experts, take someone underneath your wing and provide mentorship and guide them through these things. And that's a start. It doesn't get us to the 10x just yet, but it's a start. One of the other things we talked about was the lack of modularization in the Bitcoin core code base. And this manifests in a number of different ways. And there are existing efforts to sort of increase the modularization of the Bitcoin core code. But when you have such a small, a very tightly coupled system, it makes it very difficult for any one change to not impact other parts of the system in unexpected ways. The work that's ongoing includes libconsensus, very notable effort, but more effort does need to be put into breaking these systems out so that individuals, developers with other domain expertise can move in and change these things with full knowledge that they're not breaking other parts of the system. We obviously talked about communication problems, and this also has a number of ways of manifesting, which is the information that's out there and available. A lot of times it's duplicated, sometimes it's incorrect. We need to make an effort as a community to consolidate a lot of this information. And one of the best ways that we found of doing this is the Bitcoin Wiki. This has largely fallen into sort of the wings. We think it would be very beneficial to sort of increase community effort in documenting all of these conversations that have happened on IRC, Bitcoin Wizards, Bitcoin Stack Overflow, and getting the useful chunks of information in a place where it can go, people can go read it without interrupting someone else with the same question the 100th time. There's also the importance of reducing the information down to something consumable. So it's sort of like a limiting function. The more people that we have focused on reducing these complex ideas into something that's simpler, so that developers that don't have deep expertise can at least understand the nuances and the complexities of them, and then have the aha moment to where they do know how to contribute meaningfully. We also talked about the importance of having face-to-face meetings. This is obviously something that this particular conference is very deeply interested in, and is the first real developer-focused event in the entire community. That's really exciting. But it should also take the form of smaller events. There's a fantastic meetup group in San Francisco, the Bitcoin Developer Meetup Group. We need to see models like that develop elsewhere. We need to see regular occurrences, regular face-to-face conversations. These are very important. Conversational dynamics change when you're actually looking at the person in the face. And that's very, very valuable, as I'm sure some of you have learned today and yesterday. We need more mentorships, as we said. And we want to make a call to industry players to actually make a commitment to invest in the future of Bitcoin. This is much more important than your one-year profit returns for your company. This is much more important than your four-year projections. This is massively important. If you invest in the Bitcoin community will become stronger as a whole, and that's absolutely essential for the long-term success of the vision. Also, one of the things we talked about, which was very interesting, was the development of communities, parallel communities in things like altcoins, Litecoin and Dogecoin being among the most notable. I don't know if you guys have noticed how many people simply got involved in crypto finance because of Dogecoin or because of Litecoin. These provide opportunities that are much less risk, lower boundary, lower limitations, and allows you to experiment with ideas. And then if you find an innovation, or you find something that you actually learned something, then you can start to step up and move into the larger community. There's also things well beyond Litecoins. There's Open Bazaar. There's technologies and ways that crypto finance and this decentralized movement as a whole is taking place, peer-to-peer networks. Those are all testing grounds that we need to integrate with much more deeply. We need to reach out to these communities. Sidechains are a fantastic opportunity for this, to test just like altcoins. But we need to reach out to these other parallel communities that are working on very similar things and have very similar visions. And finally, we talked a lot about why people are motivated to participate and how do we encourage developers to participate. We do need more capital in the space. We need more people to offer jobs to developers that want to work on Bitcoin stuff. But I think more importantly is this unified vision that we are all building a better future, and that we're all working on that better future together. And that is perhaps the single biggest takeaway that we have. The fact that if we can show people and communicate that the vision of this is a future without these centralized systems, censorship that's taking place, the value loss that's taking place, the middlemanship, then more developers will definitely get involved. And just people aren't being made aware of that effectively as of yet. We talked a little bit about mentorship, but I just want to highlight MIT's program. If you are interested in offering mentorship to students or other individuals, other developers, please email bitcoin@mit.edu. They're actively looking for people to provide mentorships. So that's pretty much the complete total of what we talked about.
Warren?
All right, thank you very much. For the record, bitcoin@mit.edu goes to me. So one thing I kind of heard from that last one is it sounds like it is really important if we have sustainable financing for Bitcoin's future, because we need to be able to pay for things like this event. So why don't we have Patrick come up to tell us about that?
Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks for organizing this. All of the organizers, I just want to take a second and maybe just give everybody a round of applause who put in the time and effort to make this happen. And just one quick meta note. This conference, I've said that this year reminds me of 2012 a lot because, lots of drama, not a lot happening, but a lot of work is happening behind the scenes to set the stage. This conference reminds me a lot of San Jose in 2013. The first big Bitcoin conference, and that set the stage for a tremendous series of events afterwards that really grew Bitcoin in general. So kudos to you for putting on a great show. So we talked about how do how do we fund Bitcoin in a sustainable way, Bitcoin development, Bitcoin infrastructure, all those things. We want to put some parameters around that because you could easily find yourself in a space where you're trying to boil an ocean with a candle. So we said, okay, let's cut out things like policy and marketing and growing adoption and all that, because those aren't essential to Bitcoin operating and running. So first we defined what are those things that are critical infrastructure, things that are absolutely critical to make the network actually work and function. So full nodes, you need to have full nodes to propagating transactions. Miners, protocol maintenance, just making sure that the protocol, the uptime of the network is there, and core developers to work on both maintaining the protocol and the network and the software behind it, and also some improvements as needed to keep things moving forward. And then how do we measure those costs? What are the true costs of operating those things? I don't know if that exists right now, if somebody's put together just a dashboard to measure what the costs of running all of those elements are. And once we have figured out, the cost of actually maintaining what exists today, what would be the cost then of improving it, even in marginal ways? And then you can start thinking about, okay, if we can measure what the true costs are and the cost of maintaining things and maybe even the cost of making some improvements, how are our resources today being currently allocated? And how are we sourcing those resources in the first place? So you look at some parts of this ecosystem like mining, and the incentives are already built in. We've already thought this through, or actually Satoshi thought it through for us. But other functions in that ecosystem are not, like full nodes. And we had a great presentation on incentivizing full nodes. Should that be a financial incentive or a non-financial incentive? We kind of left that up in the air, but it's something to think about. And where it's not being, those needs aren't being met in protocol maintenance, full nodes, core developers, how do we fill that gap appropriately? And is money appropriate? In most cases it is. Technical writers, we've heard that 2 times before, so I'll say it again. Technical writers and documentation, improving that. That's an area where you can fill the gap probably with money. Technical writing isn't the sexiest thing. But if it is for anybody in here or live, then that's a thing to do. And we talked about filling that gap by creating a culture of giving back, right? I think that we've talked about this before, but in the companies that are funded and that get the VC funding or have been generating revenue or mining revenue or whatever it is, developing a culture within the community of giving back, right? Whether it's running full nodes or incentivizing full nodes or lending out some of your developer resources back to the core development process, those are ways that some of the companies can give back. Another interesting avenue we talked about, and MIT is a great example of this, and this conference is a great example of this, leveraging universities and academic institutions. Right? They have different resources than are generally available, and we kind of wondered aloud why wouldn't every academic institution be running a full node right now? They all should be, and that would solve a lot of problems. And it could also give them access to government grants, since the UK is giving out grants and the NSF is giving out grants. Perhaps that's an incentive for them to do things like that. And again, just making sure that the funded companies, that when they're raising their money, they think through in terms of their cost structure, what that giving back is, back to the protocol that they're building on top of. So those are some of the elements we talked about. Keep it brief just because I'm getting towards the end of the day. I think we're all ready to go. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Patrick. Speaking of giving back, how about those Gox coins? All right, next up we'll have, and last but not least, I should say, scalability of wallet technology.
So one of the first things we talked about was separation of wallet from the core node, and the idea of reusing the core node within other wallets. So the ability to embed the core node in other wallets. The idea of having standard interfaces, and the importance of running a full node. One of the things we discussed was the idea of running a full node in appliances, like your router, like getting getting a node running in your router so that you can access it from everywhere from your mobile. We also discussed we discussed whether SPV is going to stay. How can we incentivize it? Is it possible? The issue of SPV with privacy, security, and the fact that you're not really part of the network. You're a leaf. You're not participating. We discussed the issues of the number of nodes. We also discussed what happens if, let's say, tomorrow we have 50,000 new nodes. Is the network going to handle that? Are those nodes going to start syncing and take the network down? We discussed the idea of Oracle services having standard interfaces for multi-signature. We also discussed the problem with support. So it's hard to have customer services with open source software. So are we going to have some Red Hat model, or how is it going to work for software? So today, most of the companies that offer wallet go beyond their applications in order to support the customers. Is that how it's going to work in the future? And this was about it. I mean, we discussed how important it is to run a full node, and how is that going to work in a mobile future, and things like UTXO commitments and whether those are going to improve the situation. And yeah, we discussed what if Apple tomorrow includes a full node in their software. Like, what if we have 50,000 new nodes syncing at once? And yeah, that was about it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Lawrence. For better or for worse, I'm all out of bad jokes. So I just want to take a moment. Pindar is getting up. The only Pindar, who really has been instrumental in all of this happening. Just to express my gratitude for all of the hard work you guys have all put in, especially those of you here right now. You guys are like the warriors. You've really made this happen. I said at the beginning that there was hard work going in to make the event happen, but the hard work was going to be actually having a productive and collaborative discussion the whole time. But I just want to thank you for putting that effort in. So to you guys. And now to Pindar.
Thank you, Jeremy. Public service announcement: if you have lost a bag with the Air Canada tag, please see Anton at the back. Just to echo again, Jeremy's thanks to you who have done all the work. The presenters and the leaders have kept excellent time throughout 2 days. The contributions, just listening to these summary sessions, is amazing. Since, as you know, at the beginning, we began with the 5 no's, right? This is not a mailing list, right? There's no marketing, there's no sales, right? There's no debates, and there's no decisions. But having said that, there's been tremendous amount of observations and work and experience sharing and data sharing over the last 2 days, which I found personally amazing. Like a diamond in the rough, we have, again, the 5 C's. We began with, again, the code of conduct. So I thank you personally for staying with that. The code of conduct was really designed to create a collegial atmosphere so that we can have our communications. From those communications, hopefully will flow collaboration. You will, after this event, hopefully collaborate going between phase 1 and phase 2, which will be in Hong Kong on December 6th and 7th. And last but not least, from the collaboration, we hope that there is an emergent phenomenon, which is this phenomenon of consensus. So with that, I thank you for coming. I would especially like to thank our 39 corporate sponsors who have made this event possible, together with our 4 underwriters. So in alphabetical order, that would be Blockstream, Chaincode Labs, and MIT Media Lab DCI. So with that, let's put our hands together to all of them and to yourselves. See you in Hong Kong. Stay tuned to our website. We will share the information as we prepare for phase 2. Thank you very much.
If I can just make one more note about all of this is just remember the Chatham House rule that all the discussions that we had, in person, even if they weren't formally a part of the roundtable, just, try to not attribute it to people. Really that's very, very critical for these kinds of events, having a long-term success and us being able to have this in the future.
Sorry, forgot the one most important thing, which was I want to thank and call out, if I may, the the Workshop Planning Committee, in particular Anton Yemelanov, who is part of the Nelly Miller of Crypto Mechanics, our local hosts. Alex Mokos, Chain Code Labs, Jeremy Rubin, obviously Warren Tagami Jr., Elizabeth Stark, Victoria Van Eyck, Dan Elitzer, Adam Ludwin, and Marshall Long. Thank you very much. See you in Hong Kong in December.